Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is your weekly Washington Policy Pulse on the Balance of Power podcast. I'm Joe Matthew. Every Monday, Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst and friend of the show, Nathan Dean, shares his weekly call on upcoming catalysts in the nation's capital. Listen for the most recent and relevant policy research from our team at Bloomberg Intelligence. Now with today's installment, here's Nathan Dean.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to the Washington Policy Pulse. My name is Nathan Dean. I'm a senior policy analyst here in Washington, D.C. I want to say thank you to those of you who are listening to this via the Balance of Power podcast. We always welcome your support as well. Today is December 8th. I'm recording this at 10:02 a.m. And the reason why I'm timestamping this is because we're going to have a little bit of a busy week. I actually didn't think it was going to be all that busy, just a lot of headlines, but I think there's going to be some stuff here. First thing I want to talk about is farm aid. Now, we've talked about this in the past about $12 billion in aid and what it means for farmers. You know, the idea here is trade, not aid. But, you know, this package that we've been waiting for a couple of weeks now is set to be released later today. Now, this is going to be $12 billion. It's going to be implemented by the USDA. Last time this happened back in 2018 and 2019, there were 644,000 farms that took the aid package. They got around $22,000 worth each. And in our analysis, like I've said before on previous calls, the analysis here suggests, look, it's a Band-Aid on something that is actually a much more bigger structural issue. And that is due to the purchase of Chinese purchases of U.S. soybeans. So what we've been telling our clients is that, you know, yes, this is going to give a little bit of breathing room. Fortunately, it comes a little bit late. I mean, the spring planting season started in terms of negotiations started a couple of weeks ago. So it'll come a little bit late. We think it's going to be mostly used for capital expenditures in the fourth quarter. But we are going to see, and I think I'm fairly confident in this, we are going to see more aid packages coming later in 2026. The House Agricultural Committee, for example, some of the Republicans over there said that they could get up to $50 billion in aid, and we are still awaiting a light farm bill. For those of you who are in the agricultural sector, you probably know what I'm talking about, is that the farm bill usually is a bipartisan affair. It hasn't passed in a long time. The farm bill usually deals with SNAP benefits. That was dealt with in the One Big Beautiful Bill. But the House and Senate Ag Committee still want to move forward with this quote unquote light version of a farm bill. Hasn't been all that movement all that much. I have a note on it that I can talk to you further about it. Just give me an instant Bloomberg message and we can chat. But you know, we're anticipating a farm bill next year. Maybe that's a little bit additional as a vehicle for getting more aid. I also want to talk about what's going to happen this week with the Obamacare subsidies. So again, we had my colleague Dwayne Wright on a couple of weeks ago to talk about this. But you are going to see a vote on Wednesday from the Senate perspective, voting on the Democratic plan for a 3-year extension of these Obamacare subsidies that expire at the end of the month. Now that vote's going to fail. The Republicans have already said it's not going to happen, and so that vote is going to fail. Now, there is another plan that's being brought out by Senator Moreno of Ohio and a little bit of the Democratic senators that would give a 2-year extension. But the question here is, are the Republicans even going to try and move forward on that? I don't think the GOP strategy has been decided. Most likely it could be decided later this evening or tomorrow. Maybe if you're listening to this on the Balance of Power podcast, it's been announced. But as of right now, when we're recording this, there really is no strategy here on how to deal with this on the Republican side. And I think a lot of Republicans are just waiting for the White House to come in here and say, this is what I want to do. Because I think if you ask most of the Republicans on Capitol Hill, they're not in favor of additional subsidies. And we're just going to get into a situation where this expires. So again, it's going to be a little bit busy week on the headline perspective, but Dwayne's point of view that he's put out on the terminal several times is that he doesn't think that there's going to be, he uses words like long odds and skeptical, and we'll see if a deal can come together before the end of the year. Now, Bloomberg News is also reporting this morning that President Trump is going to sign this week an executive order on artificial intelligence. The one rule is President Trump said in his Truth Social post this morning, one rule to ring them all, or to rule them all. Sort of sounds like Lord of the Rings, you know, one ring to rule them all. That's where I was getting with this. Now, I should back up here. Now, Bloomberg government a couple of weeks ago got a copy of a draft executive order. And in that executive order, and I'm not saying this is the one that President Trump's going to sign this week, but in that executive order that Bloomberg government got a copy of, it essentially allowed the DOJ to sue states that pursued their own AI regulations and their own AI laws. Now, my colleague Matt Schettenhelm looked at it on the terminal, and Matt essentially said that if the executive order were to be like that, the courts most likely would find an issue with that and find the executive branch is overstepping its bounds. Now, if this executive order comes out and it's very similar to that, Matt's point that he put on the terminal was that you need Congress to come in and actually develop a regulation or a standard for the national framework for artificial intelligence. So even if President Trump comes out later this week and signs this executive order, look at it, have a call with Matt, and just think in the back of your mind, are the courts going to be the ones to approve this? Because Matt's looking at it right now, and Matt's sort of skeptical. Now, the one thing that, though, this executive order could do is that if the rule comes out and it's actually detailed, saying that I want the framework to look like this, and this, well, maybe that's a standard that we can actually have more debate on. Because if you have 50 patchworks, 50 states, different AI rules and so forth like that, it could get a little bit messy. But if there is this idea of what a national framework could potentially look like, then the debate going into 2026 actually looks a little bit more favorable in terms of getting regulation across the line. So again, we'll have to see what happens here. But right now, the courts most likely would take an issue with this, depending on how it looks. But again, stay close, and Matt will always be available for conversations if you want to have a conversation with him. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Netflix Warner Brothers deal, because it's actually been fairly moving. There's, I think, the biggest question that most clients on their hands saying, is this going to pass from an antitrust perspective? Netflix and Warner Brothers announced a deal that they would merge. Paramount announced just about an hour ago a hostile takeover bid. And so I wanted to point you to Jennifer Ree's analysis on the terminal, and we can get a copy of that. Just ping me and I can send a copy of this to you, where she lays out all the issues that antitrust regulators are going to be looking at in terms of the Netflix Warner Brothers deal. And it looks fairly challenging from the Netflix perspective. And her point, and this is what she just put out, is that even if President Trump doesn't get involved, and President Trump even just said on Truth Social just this morning that he's going to be taking a look at this, you're looking at a lengthy analysis here in a lengthy period. And her point is the antitrust process will likely take over a year. And that's if the DOJ challenges the deal in court. The suit will most likely be filed about a year from now. And then it would take another 8 to 9 months for the ruling. And so even though the companies say that they're going to close in 12 to 18 months, their purchase agreement also had some language in here that suggested that it could be pushed back. So again, there's going to be a lot of moving parts here, a lot of lots of scrutiny, if you will, and a lot of challenges from the Netflix perspective. So it's not going to move as quickly as I think some people thought. Maybe nobody thought that, but at least some people thought. A couple other smaller things, just wanted to highlight. The NDAA language came out last night. This is for those of you in the defense industry. The House is anticipated to have a vote later this week. Most of the provisions, I think, were pretty on par with what we were anticipating. My colleague Wayne Sanders is going to be having a note tomorrow on the winners and losers of the NDAA. But again, I think this is fairly standard, or at least the language didn't really seem all that controversial. There was some portion of it about, biotechnologies related to China. That's something that may get a little bit of headlines. But again, I don't think it's going to be all that controversial. So expect the NDAA to pass later this week at the House. Then it will go to the Senate. And then I think the Senate ultimately will pass that as well. Last two things I want to talk about. One is you should get on Supreme Court IEEPA watch. This is what we've talked about many times in the past. This is President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. Think of Liberation Day. Well, the Supreme Court could rule as early as this week on the legality of that. Holly Fromm, who we've had on this call in the past, 60% chance the Supreme Court agrees with those two lower courts and finds those rules to be unlawful. But you should be on the watch, because the earliest the Supreme Court could rule this week, probably Wednesday. I think, talking to Holly, it seems like more likely next week would be the week if the Supreme Court's going to rule in December. But again, you need to, put your red lines on the terminal, get them going, because it's going to happen fairly sooner rather than later. And the last thing I want to do is, it's outlook season for pretty much every research analyst across the globe, not especially including us. So I put my crypto outlook out this morning, and there was one thing I wanted to highlight a little bit on stablecoins, because you are going to see some movement probably before the end of the year when it comes to stablecoins. Now, the FDIC said that they are going to start the implementation of the Genius Act. Remember, this is the bill that gives the regulatory framework for stablecoins, the FDIC said that they were going to issue a proposal this year, so this month, on the application process to become a bank issuer. So if you remember, if you have issuers and you have non-bank issuers, well, they want to have regulatory oversight. The first idea is, how do you register with the authorities to become a bank issuer? So this proposal will most likely come out by the end of this year. I actually thought it was going to be out early next year, but remember how we've talked before? Regulators love to get stuff off their desks before they go home for the holidays. So if this proposal does come out, we'll be able to see how these bank issuers and non-bank issuers can register with the authorities to become a stablecoin issuer. Now that leads us to the rest of the application framework. What's the next proposal? Well, the next proposal is the prudential standards proposal. Okay, how do you actually handle capital requirements? How do you operate? What are the safety and safeguard provisions as part of that? That proposal is most likely going to be in the first quarter, if not the first half of next year. And those two proposals aligned ultimately would then be the implementation of the Genius Act. Now, if the FDIC and the bankers move this quickly, where the proposal is this month, we'll just call the next one March of 2026, you could get this wrapped up by the end of the year. And our stablecoin framework, if you will, would be up and operating by January 1st of 2027. The other thing I want to say in terms of the crypto space is that we still think it's going to be a decent chance that we are going to have the Clarity Act or a crypto market structure bill passing in the first half of next year. But just last week, the CFTC also took steps to allow spot trading on registered exchanges within their area. Now, this is actually very beneficial for the crypto industry. It allows them to move forward. But from my perspective, you still need the congressional oversight to come in here and say, to actually dot the I's and cross the T's and say this is actually good and valid. Because what the CFTC here did is it gave these companies the ability to operate, but a future CFTC can always come back and say, no, we don't have this interpretation. And as a result, we're going to walk this back. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but in order to get that clarity and the breadth of easing of knowing that no future CFTC is actually going to change this, you need the Clarity Act. So just keep that in mind when you see these additional spot trading of crypto on registered exchanges. So with that, I'm going to check one last time to make sure that we don't have any questions or thoughts. We don't. I'm going to say thank you again for listening. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and we'll talk soon.
Our thanks to Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst, bringing you the latest installment of his weekly Washington Policy Pulse. For more from BI or to join this call live each week, you can email Nathan at ndean@bloomberg.net. That's NDEAN@bloomberg.net. And come back to the podcast later today for the latest edition of Balance of Power.